Yakuza Black Panther, or Ryu Ga Gotaku Kurohyou, however you pronounce it, is the only one of the Yakuza series' 6 different spin-offs to actually ever get a sequel, not to mention a TV show and a manga. Now, despite what those two might suggest, the narrative here is probably the weakest aspect. I've watched a bit of a TV show and I can tell you it doesn't actually take that much from the games. Can't speak for the manga though. Despite the same general premise, they seem to have sort of ditched the game story, which I wouldn't say is necessarily a bad thing, because like I said, this is probably the weakest aspect, which is a shame. This is almost a bit of a reverse like a dragon situation, where in this case I was playing much more from the actual core gameplay, which, you know, is probably a good thing overall. So let's talk about that story briefly. It has a much more episodic focus than most of the Yakuza games. While they've always felt, you know, like a series of TV episodes, they did feel very much like TV drama episodes, like modern TV story-based drama. This feels more like a series of small one-off story arcs. Every episode pretty much ends in an arena fight, which, you know, it's actually probably the best part of the story. It does have this cool narrative element where you're interested to see who you beat up at the end of each episode. Sadly, that's the best part of the actual story. That kind of little interesting sort of anime brawler sort of plot there. Apparently it was inspired by Ashita Joe or Tomorrow's Joe, and it doesn't actually hold up that well against it. A lot of it just comes down to the sheer predictability. If you want to be snarky about the Yakuza series and build up your own like bingo deck of cliches, well, this is the one to throw that bingo card against, because it just feels way too predictable. Like I said, the bits where it's mostly just doing one-off small stories are better than when you start to piece together the main plot, which like, I guess you could say it's mostly more cliched than bad, but I like the spirit of the series. I obviously wouldn't be a hardcore fan who would play through games mostly in Japanese if I didn't, but this is a weak one, and there are just some moments here which feel like just sort of insanely stupid at points. But let's get off the plot. I guess if there was one more thing I'd say, it would be a character like Saejima in Yakuza 4. To me, his arc felt half finished. Like, Yakuza 4 was initially meant to be a spin-off game, in fact, and you can kind of tell. But I really feel had they had the confidence, they could have done something incredible with them. And in this case, Tachiya, our main character here, is going for a similar thing, and to me, it just doesn't work. It's just kind of too boring. So let's talk about the open world, because we're getting away from the story to what's good about this. Okay, so it's basically similar to the PS2 games. You run into enemies, you have borderline random battles, you got some shops to buy stuff for, still very old JRPG style, just with action-based combat. Some mini-games here and there. Once, like a lot of mini-games in the series, these are kind of fairly browser game quality. I mean, Yakuza has had some incredible mini-games, but the quality jumps up and down all over the place a lot of the time. But fortunately in this case, none of these things are forced on you. You can pretty much ignore them, so you're not going to have to spam your way to the end of all of these just to unlock all your movesets. The mix of styles the series is known for, like how Yakuza 0 would jump from voiced and cinematic cutscenes to a music video, to voiceless text boxes, to stylized stills with voices, to voice and text boxes in like an hour. This is at its most extreme. The game basically has 3 visual styles. There's these cool looking sort of motion comic style cutscenes, which is where you get most of the voice work. They're pretty neat. Then you got the actual open world, which is probably the weakest part visually. It's got a real issue with just not having enough character models here. And unlike the PS2 games, the whole backgrounds are all pre-rendered, which is, they look okay, but they kind of look like someone took a very nice screenshot of PS3 games and pasted them on over to the PSP as like just an image, which I think might be how they made them, I'm not sure. And then you get the actual brawling, which looks fantastic. And impressive stuff. There are some issues. It can only handle 3 character models on screen at once, which sort of makes the actual co-op fights hilariously easy. But I guess this is a good time to just move on to what is actually really good about this game and talk about the combat. If the prior games were brawlers, then this is what I'd call a fighting game light, I guess. And by that I mean the controls are pretty simple. There's no quarter circle forward backs or anything, which to me is like a thank God, because I've never liked that element. What you do get is a much more up close camera, far fewer guys to fight. Like I said, it maxes out to 3 on screen, which like I mentioned earlier does make these co-op fights kind of a joke, but there's only a few of them in the game, so hey, it's not that big a deal. You still got heat. You can power up your heat, use it to do co-op attacks when you have these rare battles, but you can also use them for environmental attacks, throw a guy through a car window, or just charge him up and do a massively powerful grab. There's not quite the same degree of environmental attacks as you might expect, but heat works quite well. Plus it makes taunting a lot better. Taunts take a while to do, but managing to finish one off will nearly always give you a full heat to actually trigger a heat action. Grabs are fun, you can pummel a guy, parries are great. What's interesting is it almost feels a bit Western in a way, in how much it wants to keep the game less UI cluttered, during combat at least. You still get these little icons showing when you've taken damage to particular body areas, which I'll get into, but you won't be seeing stuff like a health bar or even, a traditional heat bar. You do actually have stamina now, and stamina is actually kind of interesting. It sort of makes the character feel somewhat different to other Yakuza main characters who are more or less combat gods. Like, pulling off a massive combo will have your guy sort of puffing and not being able to attack. So you need to, like a Souls game, kind of balance out how much time you spend attacking. So you can't just pummel on a guy's block. And if you do pummel on a guy's block, you have a chance to break his hand, and he has a chance to do the same with you. It's all just this really neat system. It's very satisfying. It feels more brutal and less comedic. There is actually a full-on multiplayer and make your own character separate mode, which I guess maybe classifies it as a straight-out fighting game. So hey, maybe this is the new high for single-player fighting game campaigns. Can't think of much else to put it against. Maybe that one Ubisoft Naruto game, which is actually really underrated. So let's talk about how stats actually work in this. Like other Yakuza games, this is a bit of an RPG, but fortunately it's not as heavy as some of the later games. It's still a little convoluted with basically 3 different systems to level your guy up. Once you beat a guy down, you get a chance to choose what to do with him. Usually you want to match your XP, so you want to go for beatdown. Sort of changes the tone of your main character, and rather than just letting enemies go after they cough up some cash, he's got the option to stomp their head in for extra XP. Straight up leveling, mostly because it maxes out your level pretty early on. Another thing which I don't quite like so much is the emphasis on spending cash to upgrade your individual elements, such as your damage from punches, kicks, grabs, heat, stamina. All of this is basically based on just giving someone money, which wouldn't be a bad thing if earning money didn't really come down to just using casino items. Yakuza has always had this issue where often just cheating at the casinos was a very effective way to just max out your cash, which, and I'm not talking save scumming or exploiting emulation, which, if it wasn't obvious, is how I'm playing this. I'm talking about the cheat items all the games give you for various side quests or mini games and stuff like that. So really, you'll just want to use these, spam out on the casinos, earn a ton of cash and max all your stats that way. It doesn't feel like as balanced as it could be. A better system would help. Fortunately, that's kind of where my criticisms of the leveling goes down. I never felt like the game was sort of hurting my experience due to the RPG element stuff. Like every Yakuza game, you can also abuse items to basically ruin the whole thing. But I didn't do that, and I've got to say, playing it through with an agreement of no using healings during fights is a very satisfying way to do it. On a hard run, it's just a lot of fun to just master these bosses, learn their towels, parry, and just humiliate them. Just brilliant. Another thing I like is this is probably one of the few games in the series to actually give you a reason not to abuse items. That comes down to this system of perks. Like other games, you have different equiptables, but unlike other games, you can basically equip as many as you can fit in your inventory. But the rule here is that the more you have, well, the less healing items you can carry on you. So hey, it's cool that I'm rewarded in some way by being able to equip perks which maybe increases the difficulty of enemies but increases the amount of XP I get, gives me small stat boosts, that sort of thing, instead of just spamming my way through healing items, which I wouldn't do anyway, but it's nice to be given a reward for not doing that. To briefly bring up the last tier of the leveling system, there's styles. Not counting Kenzan, if you consider that it was really just about equipping different weapons, this is the first Yakuza game to have a style system. And unlike Zero, there is an absolute ton. But this isn't really about giving them ridiculous amounts of moves. Like, if you're expecting zero amounts of abilities, you're going to be disappointed. The good thing is the styles are a bit more balanced. They feel less messy. Admittedly, there is a lot of crossover between them, and you can't stylistically switch them out mid-combat. As you level them up, you unlock new ones. So they're not really balanced around making each one even. It's more about making you try different combat styles, and that's another thing I enjoyed a good amount. I should mention that some are tied to certain side quests, so you want to go ahead and get a guide because most of the side quests aren't English translated. It's quite easy to find out where to find them though, so just go ahead, cheat, read a guide and find out how to unlock each style, because unlocking one style is likely going to unlock another style when you level it up. And hey, like a fighting game, it is fun to mash around and try each different technique out or each moveset. And since the move system is actually pretty simple, you can pretty much learn the basics of each style very quickly, have some fun with it, then move on to a new one once you've leveled it up. Bosses, well, I'm showing you some early ones, and they're a big treat also. Like, I generally tend to see the bosses in the Yakuza series as always some of the most enjoyable parts, and this this is one of those games where they absolutely nail them. Another thing I like a lot better than Like a Dragon, to be honest. That's not to say they're great as far as narrative goes. Like I said, a lot of them sort of have some quick short story. You quickly predict who the boss you're going to fight at the end of the chapter is. But they're fun fights. They have specific rules where they're able to trigger certain moves normal enemies, even like ones designed as mini-bosses, can't. So you kind of want to, it's just this cool fight where you're gradually draining them down. And due to the injury system, you both see them get more aggressive as you keep fighting, but also sort of less skilled, so they become more wild. Hit after you've beaten some guy's head in, he's more likely to stay down longer, so you can really unleash a long combo on him. But then as you're approaching sort of their their limit, they start pulling out these massive moves which can just near one-shot you. I guess this might frustrate some players, and there are some points where you do feel a bit like, oh, this is bullshit, I didn't know he could suddenly do that and instantly kill me. But yeah, I like the bosses a lot. And I think that's kind of it for me as far as this game goes. It's just very fun combat. The story itself is okay. Like, if you were to place it among a bunch of like fairly mediocre game stories, I'd probably say it was one of the better ones or something. But for a Yakuza game, it's a little on the weaker side if you ask me. But the core gameplay completely makes up for that. I like how just tight it feels. It doesn't feel like it's got the flab a lot of the later games have, which, I mean, it is shorter than a lot of the newer ones, but you know what, I like that when it can get straight to what's good about a game instead of like making a game like 10 different games and mashing around between them. So yeah, I really hope the sequel gets translated, and even if it's not, I'm already playing it and I'm already seeing massive gameplay improvements in various areas. So yeah, this probably isn't going to come out from the official team anytime soon, but hey, if it does, I'll buy it, I promise. I played with some of the PSP already. This is the second non-translated Yakuza game I've played to my completion, and it's a fun time.